Have you ever felt that inexplicable void? That inner chasm that seems to grow no matter how hard you try to fill it? It's a familiar feeling, but hard to name. A mixture of dissatisfaction and anxiety that perhaps nothing you do will ever be enough. Julien Sorel, the elusive hero of Stendhal's The Red and the Black, is the very embodiment of this spiritual and emotional dilemma. Born in a small provincial town, the son of a humble carpenter, Julien refuses to submit to the destiny that society seems to have written for him. He wants to escape anonymity, banality, a dull existence. But what he pursues goes far beyond wealth or social status. It is a quest to exist in the eyes of the world, to transcend the ordinary and rise to something greater, something brighter. From a young age, Julien finds refuge in books, and not just any books, the stories of Napoleonic exploits. For him, Napoleon is not only a hero of French history, he is living proof that a man can rise to the top through sheer force of will. This idea fuels in Julien a devouring ambition, but also a dangerous illusion, that power and recognition could appease what burns within him. However, there is a contradiction in this aspiration that he does not yet see. What he seeks is not simply to climb the social ladder, but to find meaning in his own existence. And this quest, despite all its apparent grandeur, could well be his downfall. When he is hired as a tutor in the house of the mayor of Verrières, Julien sees his life change. With his mysterious charm and sharp intelligence, he quickly captures the attention of Madame de Rênal, the mayor's wife. This woman, sensitive and elegant, becomes fascinated by this enigmatic young man. But Julien himself does not see this interest as a simple game of seduction. For him, each admiring glance from Madame de Rênal is a victory, not over her, but over a society that has always despised him. By seducing her, Julien proves to himself that he can defy the norms and manipulate the invisible hierarchies that govern the world around him. But this victory is bitter. The pleasure he derives from this conquest is intense, almost euphoric, but it quickly disappears, giving way to an even deeper emptiness. Julien realizes that the power he exerts over Madame de Rênal, although exhilarating, is insufficient to satisfy his need for grandeur. So he looks further, higher. He turns his attention to Mathilde de la Mole, the daughter of an influential marquis. Mathilde, cold and sophisticated, is everything that Madame de Rênal is not. Winning her heart represents for Julien not only a new adventure, but also an entry into the highest circles of society. However, this new quest is far from being a simple ascension. Mathilde, with her calculating mind, is a formidable adversary. Their relationship becomes a power play, a psychological battle where every word, every gesture is a strategic maneuver. Julien, although accustomed to manipulation, finds himself this time facing an equality that destabilizes him. But even when he wins this victory, he discovers a truth that he still refuses to accept. The satisfaction he pursues is ephemeral, like a mirage that disappears as soon as one thinks it has been achieved. Through these conquests, Julien begins to perceive a disturbing pattern. What he desperately seeks is never really for himself. Every success, every admiring look, every mark of respect is an attempt to prove something to others, to a society that he despises but on which he totally depends to define his value. This contradiction is at the heart of his inner drama. He hates the opinions of others, but he is a prisoner of their judgment. This tension between his boundless ambition and his chronic dissatisfaction makes Julien a universal character. Because if we look closely, how many of us are ready to admit that our own efforts, our own successes, are often motivated by this same need for validation? Julien embodies this part of us that runs after success, hoping that it will finally provide an answer to the emptiness we feel. But just like him, we often discover that these victories are never enough. Julien's journey is not simply that of an ambitious young man. It is a mirror held up to our own existences. It raises profound questions about what we truly value, about the sacrifices we are willing to make to achieve our goals, and about the truths we refuse to see. How far are we willing to go to satisfy this need for recognition? And at what point do we realize that what we are looking for was perhaps already within us, if only we had taken the time to see it? Stay with us, because this story does not end here. Julien, in his tragic quest, offers us a crucial lesson, that of understanding that it is not in the eyes of others that we will find our true value. In the moments that follow, we will explore not only the depths of his soul, but also what his fall announces for each of us. You may well discover answers that you did not suspect. Julien Sorel, this young man caught in a whirlwind of contradictory desires, embodies much more than a personal quest. He is the reflection of a universal mechanism, that of the reward system of our brain, a mechanism which, although designed to guide us towards pleasure and satisfaction, can easily become an invisible prison. Every victory Julien wins, every admiring glance he gets, every social rung he climbs, triggers a burst of dopamine in him, the neurotransmitter that fuels our sense of pleasure. But what Julien, like so many others, doesn't know is that this exhilarating sensation is never meant to last. The reward system, the part of our brain that responds to pleasure, follows an implacable rule: adaptation. This phenomenon, known as hedonic adaptation, explains why an initially euphoric experience ends up becoming normal, even banal. Let's take a simple example. Imagine that you buy a brand new car. At first, every detail, every curve of the bodywork, every sound of the engine fills you with joy. But as the weeks go by, this car, so special at first, becomes simply another object in your daily life. Julien experiences this adaptation on a much more dramatic scale. When he seduces Madame de Rênal, the pleasure he gets from it is intense. He feels powerful, capable of breaking the social expectations that should have kept him in his place. But very quickly, this conquest loses its luster. What he thought was a decisive victory turns into a simple step, a plateau from which he already contemplates his next target. This constant dissatisfaction pushes Julien to seek ever greater challenges, ever more dazzling rewards. And this is no coincidence. Neuroscience shows us that the human brain is particularly sensitive to novelty. It is this novelty that fuels our reward system, and Julien becomes the tragic illustration of it. This need for novelty and excitement also explains why Julien is never satisfied with his achievements. He goes from Madame de Rênal to Mathilde de la Mole, convinced that this new conquest will finally fill the void he feels. But Mathilde, although exotic and inaccessible, ends up reproducing the same pattern. Julien's brain, always seeking stronger stimuli, quickly gets used to this new environment, pushing him to consider even bigger and therefore riskier ambitions. In our modern lives, this cycle is just as present. Think about how we use social media. Every like, every notification acts as a small reward, releasing a dose of dopamine. But as we receive these rewards, their impact diminishes. What was once enough to make us happy suddenly seems insufficient, pushing us to post more, to seek more validation. Julien, with his growing ambitions, works the same way. And this relentless quest for rewards, whether social or material, often ends up exhausting us emotionally. Before diving into the depths of Julien Sorel's story, take a moment to reflect. When is the last time you felt this inner emptiness, this feeling of chasing something without ever really achieving it? Share your thoughts in the comments, because each point of view enriches this discussion. And if these topics speak to you, consider subscribing to our channel so you don't miss any of our explorations. For Julien, this spiral is not only biological, it is also deeply psychological. His need to climb the social ladder is fueled by an insecurity rooted in his childhood. Born into a modest family, where he was neither valued nor understood, Julien has developed an extreme sensitivity to the gaze of others. What he seeks through his conquests is not only pleasure, but a form of recognition, proof that he has value. Unfortunately, this external validation, although intense, is always temporary, and when it disappears, it leaves an even deeper void, forcing Julien to go back to hunting for the next reward. Neuroscientists have shown that this cycle of pleasure and disillusionment can become addictive. The brain, wired to seek pleasure, enters a loop where each new reward becomes a necessity. But as we pursue these rewards, the threshold for satisfaction increases, pushing us to take ever greater risks to achieve the same level of pleasure. Julien, in his social ascent, embodies this phenomenon. At each stage, he strives to surpass his previous achievements, only to find himself faced with the same disillusionment each time. Another fascinating aspect of Julien's story is how his social environment reinforces this cycle. The society in which he lives values status, wealth, and power, goals that, while attractive, are inherently competitive and limited. Julien, seeking approval in such a system, is trapped in a game where there is never a true end. Even when he seems to reach the top, he discovers that there is always a higher level, another target to reach. In contemporary society, we see this same mechanism at work in the culture of consumerism. We are constantly encouraged to buy more, to own more expensive things, to aim for lifestyles that always seem just out of reach. Like Julien, we are encouraged to believe that the next purchase, the next promotion, or the next relationship will finally bring us the satisfaction we seek. But as Julien's story shows, this is never the case. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that it plays on our most basic instincts. The brain's reward system, designed to motivate us to survive, is hijacked by goals that, while promising happiness, only exacerbate our dissatisfaction. Julien, unable to recognize this truth, continues to chase dreams that can never fulfill him. And through his story, Stendhal offers us a warning. If we do not understand the mechanisms that drive our desires, we risk becoming prisoners of our own ambitions. But the question remains, what can be done to break this cycle? Julien, for all his intelligence and determination, never finds an answer. Yet his failure prompts us to reflect on our own choices. And as we delve deeper into his story, we discover that the key may lie not in what we pursue, but in how we understand our own desires. Julien Sorel, lost in his ambitions and insatiable desires, seems to embody an inner struggle as old as time, the quest for pleasure and its role in our search for happiness. Since the beginning of philosophy, this question has been at the center of human reflections. Why do we pursue pleasure, and why does it seem to elude us as soon as we touch it? Julien, through his fleeting successes and disillusionments, becomes a perfect illustration of the ideas of thinkers such as Epicurus, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche, who, each in their own way, explored the pitfalls and promises of pleasure. Epicurus, often misunderstood, did not see pleasure as an end in itself. Contrary to the image of a philosopher advocating unbridled hedonism, Epicurus advocated a measured and thoughtful approach to pleasure. According to him, true pleasure lies in the absence of pain, in simplicity, and in serenity of mind. Julien, on the other hand, chooses a radically opposite path. For him, pleasure is a conquest, a relentless climb to ever higher peaks. Each victory, whether social or romantic, is an attempt to fill an inner void that he does not know how to name. But each time the void returns deeper, more overwhelming. Could Julien have found peace in a simpler life, more in accordance with the precepts of Epicurus? Perhaps. But his mind, consumed by ambition, pushes him to seek pleasures that, far from liberating him, imprison him. Arthur Schopenhauer, for his part, saw life as an endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. For him, each satisfied desire begets a new desire, creating an endless loop. Julien is a living example of this theory. When he gets what he wants, whether it is the admiration of Madame de Rênal or the attention of Mathilde de la Mole, he never finds the satisfaction he hoped for. No sooner has he achieved his goal than he seeks another, believing that the next one will finally bring him peace. But as Schopenhauer anticipated, this peace remains elusive. Julien, in his obsession with immediate rewards, is condemned to live in a state of perpetual lack. This pessimistic view of life may seem overwhelming, but it raises a crucial question. How can we break this cycle? Nietzsche, in his critique of society's imposed values, offers a different perspective. He believes that much of our suffering comes from our tendency to live according to the expectations of others, rather than in accordance with our own values. Julien, although ambitious and determined, is deeply influenced by the social norms of his time. He seeks to prove his worth to a society that despises him, but this quest is fundamentally hypocritical. He despises elites while seeking their approval. This duality is at the heart of his inner conflict. Nietzsche would have encouraged Julien to reject these external values and embrace a life guided by his own authentic aspirations. But for Julien, this path remains inaccessible. Caught in the nets of his need for validation, he never manages to free himself from the invisible chains of social recognition. This tension between the philosophies of simplicity, desire, and authenticity resonates deeply in our modern lives. We live in an age where pleasure is everywhere, from gourmet meals to dream vacations to the instant gratification of social media. But like Julien, we often discover that these pleasures, while seductive, are never enough to fulfill our deepest longings. The emptiness he feels is a mirror of our own dissatisfaction. Why, despite all that we have, do we often feel this lack? The answers that philosophers have given to this question are not easy solutions, but they invite us to reflect on the very nature of our desires. Another fascinating aspect of Julien's quest is its tension between immediate pleasure and the search for meaning. Epicurus would have suggested that Julien focus on simple pleasures, friendship, contemplation, and the absence of inner turmoil. Schopenhauer would have seen in his struggle an expression of the will to live, that blind force that pushes us to continue despite our suffering. Nietzsche, finally, might have admired Julien's ambition while lamenting his lack of personal vision. But what makes Julien's story so compelling is that it doesn't limit itself to just one of these perspectives. It embodies them all, revealing the complexities of the human condition. As we delve deeper into these reflections, it's impossible not to notice the parallels between Julien's life and the challenges we face today. If Epicurus invites us to find serenity in simplicity, how many of us are truly willing to give up the relentless pursuit of more? If Schopenhauer warns us that desire is a source of suffering, how can we reconcile this with our natural instinct to always want to move forward? And if Nietzsche encourages us to embrace our own values, how can we escape the pervasive influence of society? Through Julien, these philosophical questions take on a profoundly human dimension. They are no longer mere abstract ideas, but concrete dilemmas with which we can all identify. We see in his journey a struggle that is also ours, the desire to live fully, to find meaning, and to escape the chronic dissatisfaction that seems to be the lot of our existence. As Julien continues his ascent, his story pushes us to reflect on our own choices. Are we, like him, prisoners of a quest for external validation? Or are we capable of finding a balance, a way of living that frees us from the illusions of pleasure and the expectations of others? The answer, perhaps, lies not in what we pursue, but in how we understand our own desires. Julien Sorel, although ambitious and resolute, is above all a young man haunted by an insatiable quest for validation. This quest, which guides his actions and choices, finds its roots in the depths of his psychology. More than just a desire for social success or love, Julien seeks to prove that he deserves to be seen, recognized, and valued. To understand this need, it is essential to examine the psychological mechanisms that shape his behavior, as well as the invisible wounds that fuel his determination. From a very young age, Julien was confronted with a cold and brutal reality. He was neither wanted nor appreciated by his own family. The son of a rough and authoritarian carpenter, he grew up in an environment where words of encouragement or affection were as rare as moments of tenderness. This lack of recognition in his family circle deeply marked Julien. In attachment theory, developed by John Bowlby, we learn that a child's first relationships with his parental figures directly influence his perception of himself and the world. Julien, deprived of this nourishing bond, developed a vision of himself based on lack, on the idea that he had to prove his worth in order to be accepted. This pattern continues throughout his life. With each significant interaction, Julien unconsciously seeks to fill this void left by his childhood. His relationship with Madame de Rênal perfectly illustrates this need. By seducing this woman, he is not only seeking to defy social conventions, but to fill a deep emotional void. Each admiring look she offers him, each sweet word she speaks, acts as a temporary balm on his inner wounds. But this balm quickly fades, leaving Julien facing the same dissatisfaction, the same feeling of emptiness. Social psychology offers us another key to understanding Julien, the phenomenon of social comparison. In a stratified society like that of 19th century France, where rank and status determine almost everything, Julien constantly finds himself in a position of inferiority. He compares himself to the nobles, the wealthy, and those in positions of power, and each comparison reinforces his sense of inadequacy. This dynamic, described by psychologist Leon Festinger, fuels a cycle of aspiration and frustration. For Julien, each social victory, such as his entry into Mathilde de la Mole's circle, is a desperate attempt to climb the ladder and narrow the gap between himself and those he admires or envies. But this quest comes at a cost. Julien becomes increasingly dependent on the validation of others to maintain his self-esteem. This dependence drives him to sometimes self-destructive behaviors. such as his emotional manipulation or his obsession with relationships that are not based on genuine love, but on the power he can exert over others. His case is not unique. Modern psychology shows that when our self-esteem is based on external factors, the way others see us, our status, or our material possessions, it becomes incredibly fragile. The slightest failure or rejection can cause a precipitous fall. A striking example of this fragility is found in the moment when Julien realizes that, despite all he has accomplished, he is still unsatisfied. After winning over Madame de Rênal and capturing Mathilde's attention, he discovers that these victories, while exhilarating at the time, do nothing to resolve his inner malaise. This phenomenon, which psychologists call cognitive dissonance, creates a conflict between what he thinks he wants, social recognition, and what he really needs, inner peace and self-acceptance. Neuroscience sheds fascinating light on this dynamic. When a person receives some form of validation, such as a social reward or a compliment, the brain releases dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure. But this release is temporary. Over time, the brain becomes accustomed to these stimuli, meaning that it requires more and more validation to get the same level of satisfaction. Julien, caught in this cycle, becomes a perfect example of what researchers call reward tolerance. Each success quickly loses its luster, forcing him to seek even greater validation to fill the void he feels. But there is another crucial dimension to Julien's story, the role of society in creating these unrealistic expectations. In Julien's world, as in ours, society values appearances, status, and visible achievements. It rewards those who conform to its standards while marginalizing those who do not. Julien, as a low-born man, feels this pressure acutely. Each failure or rejection he experiences reinforces his sense of not being good enough, of never being able to reach the level of acceptance he desires. What makes this dynamic so powerful is that it is universal. We see these same patterns in our modern lives, whether through social media, where likes and comments often dictate our sense of worth, or in professional settings, where success is measured in terms of titles and salaries. Julien, with his inner struggles, becomes a mirror of our own insecurities and aspirations. However, Julien's story raises a crucial question. Is it possible to break this cycle? Can we find a source of validation that is not based on external factors, but on an inner acceptance of ourselves? This question, although left unanswered in Julien's story, is at the heart of the teachings of many thinkers and spiritual traditions. Julien Sorel is much more than a character driven by personal ambitions. He is also the product of a rigid and hierarchical society, where each individual is judged according to their birth, status, and possessions. In such a world, social ascension becomes almost a necessity for anyone seeking to escape anonymity. But this quest, far from liberating Julien, imprisons him in a spiral of expectations and social pressures that push him ever further away, while gradually stripping him of his authenticity. As we discover Julien's struggles and aspirations together, a question arises. Do you think that the quest for recognition and validation is an inevitable part of human nature? Or is there a way to free oneself from it? Let us know what you think in the comments. We would love to hear your thoughts. And remember, by subscribing, you join a community of reflection and sharing around subjects as profound as they are enriching. In 19th century France, where Stendhal sets Julien's story, social classes were almost insurmountable boundaries. The nobles dominated not only by their wealth, but also by their cultural and political influence. The working classes, for their part, were reduced to subordinate roles, their value defined by their usefulness and obedience. Julien, born into a modest family, feels the weight of this structure from a very young age. But instead of accepting it, he develops a silent rebellion, a fierce determination to prove that he is more than what society wants to impose on him. However, this rebellion is in itself a trap. Julien does not seek to reject the values of this society, but to conform to them, to excel in them. He adopts the codes of the elites, imitating their language, their posture, their way of thinking, all the while harboring a deep contempt for their hypocrisy. This duality, desiring to belong to a group while despising it, is at the heart of Julien's drama. He will do anything to be accepted, but this acceptance, even when he wins it, never brings him the satisfaction he hopes for. A striking example of this dynamic is his interaction with Mathilde de la Mole. Mathilde represents everything Julien admires and envies: sophistication, wealth, social power. But their relationship is a constant struggle. Mathilde, aware of her privilege, sees in Julien only a challenge, a distraction, a way to break the boredom of his gilded existence. Julien, for his part, sees in her an opportunity, a way to access a world that has always been closed to him. But even when he wins her affection, he realizes that it is not enough. Mathilde's expectations, his family's silent judgments, the constant need to prove his worth, all of this only adds to Julien's burden. This social pressure is not unique to Julien's time. It finds troubling echoes in our contemporary world. Today, although class boundaries are less visible, they persist in other forms. Degrees, luxury brands, social media followers. Modern society like Julien's values appearance and performance. We are constantly encouraged to show off our success, to prove that we belong to a certain group, whether through our possessions, our careers, or our relationships. But like Julien, many discover that this quest for social validation is a never-ending race. Each success is quickly eclipsed by the need to achieve a new, bigger, more impressive one. Another crucial aspect of this dynamic is the impact it has on human relationships. Julien, in his quest for status, often treats people as tools to achieve his goals. Madame de Rênal is not a woman he deeply loves, but a symbol of his power over a higher social class. Mathilde, similarly, becomes a means for Julien to elevate himself rather than a true partner. This behavior, while calculating, reflects a universal truth. When we are obsessed with appearance and success, our relationships become superficial, reduced to transactional exchanges rather than true connections. In our world, this manifests itself in similar ways. How many relationships today are shaped by what the other can bring us, whether in terms of status, opportunities, or even emotional validation? Social media, for example, fosters a culture where interactions are often driven by the need for visibility or recognition, rather than a genuine desire for connection. Julien, although living in a different context, exemplifies this same trend, revealing the dangers of sacrificing authenticity for social validation. What makes this spiral particularly insidious is that it is reinforced by the expectations of society itself. Julien, like us, is constantly bombarded with messages that value visible success, material possessions, and the approval of others. These messages, while promising happiness, create immense pressure. Julien, unable to resist this pressure, becomes a prisoner of his own ambitions. Each step he takes, each level he reaches, only adds to his burden rather than freeing him. But Julien's story raises a fundamental question. Is it possible to free oneself from these expectations? Can we find a way to live that is not dictated by social norms, but by our own authentic values and desires? Julien, in his obsession with external validation, never explored this possibility, but his failure offers us an opportunity to reflect on our own choices. As we come to the end of our exploration of Julien Sorel's life, it is hard not to feel a certain gravity in the lessons he leaves us. Julien, with his all-consuming ambitions, his fleeting conquests, and his profound disillusionments, has offered us much more than just a story. He has held up a mirror to our own lives, revealing the pitfalls of external validation, the frantic race for success, and the illusory quest for happiness that always seems out of reach. Through his rise and fall, we have seen how the desire for recognition can become a prison, distancing us not only from others, but especially from ourselves. Julien sought greatness, but at what cost? In his pursuit of other people's approval, he sacrificed his inner peace, his authentic relationships, and ultimately his own future. Yet his story is not only tragic, it is also a powerful invitation to reflect on our own priorities, choices, and aspirations. We live in a world where social pressures are omnipresent. Social media, professional expectations, cultural norms, they all seem to conspire to push us to always want more, to always be better. But Julien reminds us of a crucial truth. Whatever we seek outside can never compensate for what we don't find inside. So what can we learn from him? Perhaps true freedom lies not in what we own or accomplish, but in our ability to define our own values, to detach ourselves from the expectations of others, and to find lasting satisfaction in the simple and sincere. It is a difficult path, but essential to escaping the emptiness Julien knew so intimately. Thank you for taking the time to dive into this reflection with us, for following Julien's story and letting it resonate with your own experiences. This journey is not only literary, it is deeply human and spiritual. We hope it has inspired you to look beyond appearances and reconnect with what really matters. If this content has touched you or brought you new perspectives, do not hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters and enriches this discussion. And to continue this journey together, subscribe to our channel to discover other deep and inspiring reflections. Thank you again for your presence, your curiosity, and your commitment. See you soon for a new exploration of the human soul and the mysteries that animate us all.